Hello and welcome to Tech Deals, part 2 of the $1,200 Ryzen 5 1600 computer build video series, Why Vlog. This video is the deep dive into all the part choices and alternatives you might consider in my Ryzen 5 1600 $1,200 build. Now, if you have not seen the first part, check it out, first link in the video description below. Part 1 is the parts overview, a short 10-minute video where I talk about the benefits, why each of these parts were included, what was included, and what the goal of this build is. This is going to be a much longer video. I'm going to look at each part individually in much greater detail. Why this processor instead of that one? What might you change on the video card, power supply, RAM, case, etc. to customize the machine to your needs? RGB, no RGB, that sort of thing. Now, the next build in this series, part 3, is going to be the build video. Be sure you are subscribed to my channel to be notified when the build video comes out. It should only be a couple of days after this posts. And then finally, check out the other links down in the video description below. Most, if not all, of everything that I mentioned in this long video is going to be linked down there to Amazon and Newegg. If you found this video helpful and useful in your computer build search or upgrade choices, then please use those links. I would greatly appreciate it. Before I dive into the individual components, I want to give a big picture view first on how I ended up at the $1,200 budget price with a Ryzen 5 1600. In the comments beneath part 1 of this video, many people questioned how in the world we don't have either more graphics card, more CPU, or a lower price for these components. Let me be clear, this is both a form and a function build. This is designed to be both powerful, but also being attractive and fun to look at, use, and live with. You could certainly get more performance for less money if you didn't care about the case, the appearance of the motherboard, or future expandability. Now, I'll talk more about that in the individual components, but I do want to be clear here that at the $1,200 price, everything is always going to be a compromise. Do you buy a nicer case or a nicer graphics card? Now, some people may very well say, well, I'd rather have a better graphics card because that gives me more performance, and that's perfectly fine. Custom PC is a custom PC. You build it any way you want. Now, I'll talk about those alternatives in the video, but I just want to be clear that some people place value on form as much as function. That beautiful case back there, the nice motherboard, future upgradability, has value. And so what I've tried to do is create a balanced build that puts equal parts form with the equal parts function. So I'll talk about how you can get more performance for the money in just a second, but I want to be clear up front with how we ended up at the $1,200 price point rather than just looking at raw FPS numbers. First up, we have our Ryzen 5 1600 CPU, about $210, at least when I'm recording this in August of 2017. Please note that all prices in this video were accurate at the time of recording, but if you're watching this in December of 2017, they'll probably be different. In any case, for $210, this may very well be the best deal on the market today for a CPU. 6 cores, 12 threads, 3.2 gigahertz base clock speed, 3.6 gigahertz turbo clock speed, unlocked multiplier, fully overclockable, and it includes an excellent Wraith Spire cooler. It is a 95 watt TDP cooler, and it's really all this CPU needs. Now, you'll notice there are other coolers on the desk. I'll talk about those in a second. Now, for $80 more than the CPU, you have the option to upgrade to the Ryzen 7 1700. Do I recommend it for a build at the $1,200 price point? I do if you have the money. Now, I realize that that means you either have to take something else out or go over the budget. But what you get for the Ryzen 7 1700 is two things. The first is you get a higher turbo speed, but not by much, 3.7 instead of 3.6, a lower base speed, although its effective all-core turbo speed is still pretty good. It's pretty close to the Ryzen 5 1600. And the Wraith Spire cooler, also 95 watt TDP that comes with it, is RGB. Yay, more lights. Now, RGB in this case is a ring around the actual cooler head itself. It is controllable with various software programs. It can be plugged into the RGB port of your board. So if you're interested in having more RGB in your system, that might be worthwhile upgrading over the Ryzen 5 1600. Now, would I go lower than a Ryzen 5 1600? Not at this price point. A Ryzen 5 1400 or a Ryzen 5 1500, those are both 4-core 8-thread chips versus 6-core 12-thread chips. If you're looking at spending $1,000 or more in 2017 to build a computer, it should have at least the 1600 in it. The Ryzen 5 1400 would be an awesome processor for a $600 to an $800 machine. but it really is only about $50 less, and you're losing a lot of its processing power and a lot of future capability. So at this price point, I wouldn't go any lower than this. The next question is, what about the 1600X? There's a CPU in between the 1600 and the 1700 called the 1600X. Now the 1600X is currently only $20 more expensive than the 1600. It has a base clock speed of 3.6 and a turbo speed of 4.0. So that is a very nice performance boost over the 1600. But it does not come with a cooler at all. There is no cooler in the box. So when you consider that it's $20 more for the chip and then you also have to buy a cooler, you have to ask yourself, is it worth it? Actually, it might be. If you don't want to overclock, if the entire idea of overclocking your CPU makes you uncomfortable, makes you nervous, if you'd simply like to avoid it completely, buy a separate cooler, use the Ryzen 5 1600X, run it at stock clock speeds, and it will be a nice performance jump over the 1600. It isn't quite as good a deal for the money because of the higher price, but it's easier because there's nothing to worry about. You could buy a $30 Cooler Master Hyper 212 Evo or a $35 Pure Rock from Be Quiet, install it on the Ryzen 5 1600X, and you will have no worries about cooling whatsoever. Now, there are some aftermarket coolers a little bit less expensive than these. In fact, there's a T4 by Cooler Master that's in the $15 to $18 range that you could consider, and there are others. But if you're spending $1,000 to $1,200 for your machine and you want that extra performance with the X chip, buy one of these. They're really good coolers. Both of these are rated to a higher TDP than the Ray Spire is, so for overclocking, they do offer a little bit more performance. I wouldn't replace a Wraith Spire with either of these, but if you're buying the X chip, they're very good choices. Regarding overclocking, using the included Wraith Spire cooler on either the Ryzen 7 1700 or Ryzen 5 1600, you should comfortably expect to get a fixed 3.7 gigahertz on all the cores of these chips using the included Wraith Spire cooler. Some people get lucky and get really good chips and manage to get 3.8 out of it. Some people get a little bit less lucky and only get 3.6 fixed on all the cores. Yes, this is a 3.6 turbo out of the box, but not on all 6 cores. That's an important distinction to make. But I have had very good luck overclocking these using the Wraith Spire cooler. Yes, I've had it on both chips. My Ryzen 7 1700 and my Ryzen 5 1600 both run at 3.7 gigahertz without any trouble on the included stock cooler. If, on the other hand, you want to run at 4.0 gigahertz fixed on all the cores, you are going to need an aftermarket cooler. None of my Ryzen CPUs will run at over 3.8 gigahertz at any setting on the included stock cooler. I have to go to aftermarket cooling for that. So, for example, if you want to run a Ryzen 5 1600X at 4.0 fixed, you could certainly go with one of these two air coolers, but you might want to consider something like this. The Corsair H55. Now this is a $60 120mm liquid cooler, but it does have superior cooling performance to both of these coolers. In fact, I have that exact cooler on my FX 8300, which is a much hotter CPU than this is, running at 4.2 gigahertz fixed on all 8 of those cores. For $60, it's a good value for the money for a Ryzen 5 1600X. I wouldn't use it on a 1700X, just briefly. If you're going to spend the money on a 1700X, I would go with a 240mm liquid cooler if you're spending that much money. But that's a topic for another video. For the 1600X, that would be my choice if you want 4.0 fixed on all the cores. So far, we've only been talking about AMD CPUs. This is an AMD build, but I'll briefly talk about Intel chips. What would you put into a $1,200 build today in August of 2017 if you're wanting to go to the blue team over on Intel? Frankly, nothing. I hate to say this, but nothing at the moment. All of the i5 chips in the 7th generation from Intel are 4-core, 4-thread chips. They are roughly equivalent in performance to the Ryzen 3 processors. Those are the $110 Ryzen 3 1200 and $130 Ryzen 3 1300X. There is no way in the world I would consider putting either of those chips into even a $1,000 build, much less a $1,200 machine. The i7 7700K is a good CPU, and it's great for gaming today, but it's 4 cores and 4 threads, roughly equivalent to the Ryzen 5 1400 or 1500X. It does have a better clock speed, but very quickly, 4 cores and 8 threads is going to become the new entry-level chip, and I would not, in August of 2017, put it into a build like this. Besides the fact that those processors are $330 and don't really fit into this budget, the other issue you're running into is that the 8th generation of Intel chips is currently rumored to be coming out soon, and they are going to be 6 cores, 12 threads for the new i7 consumer Coffee Lake chips, and those may very well be coming out later this year. Now, you might say, why don't I just wait to build for one of those? Maybe you should, but they're not going to be $210 like this, and they're not going to come with a 95-watt Wraithspire cooler that's just over 30 decibels of noise. Very quiet cooler, by the way. It will, however, likely have a higher clock speed and higher frame rates. I will cover Coffee Lake when it comes out, but in terms of what's available in August of 2017 at the $1,200 price point, there isn't anything from Intel that I would put in here. It's all Ryzen all day long. Now, if you absolutely want an Intel chip, raise the budget and put an i7 7700K in. I wouldn't recommend any of the i5s or any of the i3s at this point if you're looking for a premium computer experience. Just be aware that while the i7 7700K is fast today, it won't age as gracefully as these will because of its core and thread count. So if you're absolutely set on Intel, strongly I would recommend waiting a few weeks or a month or two and see what comes out with the announcements on the 8th generation of the CPUs from them, codenamed Coffee Lake. One final point on CPUs before we move on to the motherboard. Is there any point to buying a Ryzen 7 1700 CPU in 2017 if gaming is your primary interest? Not really. Even if you're live streaming, a Ryzen 5 1600 will live stream most games just fine. There's a few exceptions. I wouldn't want to live stream Ghost Recon on anything less than a Ryzen 7, but most would be just fine on a Ryzen 5 1600. However, are you building this computer for 2017? Or are you building it for the next 3+ years? Do you want to be able to keep your CPU without having to upgrade it for several years? You might want to consider spending the money if you can afford it. I'm already seeing games that are using 6+ cores and a few that will load this up. If you put Ghost Recon Wildlands on a Ryzen 7, it will use 8 full cores. It still runs fine on 4+8. So if you have, for example, a Ryzen 5 1400 or an i7 7700K, for example, Ghost Recon Wildlands actually does run just fine. But it's the last of the generation of games that are going to do that. PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, for example, just recently got a patch. In fact, I think it was just yesterday or the day before, that is now updating it to support 6+ cores. Now, I have not benchmarked it yet, but I will at some point here in the future. I've had a lot of requests to do PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds, so that will be coming up in the future. If you're buying a CPU for the next 3 years, considering that Intel is now updating the consumer side of things with 6+ cores, I think that the days of 4 cores being a high-end system are gone, and 6 is going to be the new entry level for enthusiasts. So 8 is worth considering if you want 3+ years out of your computer. Not needed today, but 18 months, 24 months from now, you might be very glad you spent the money because you may very well be able to defer upgrading your machine for another 1 or 2 years. Whereas if you buy the Ryzen 5, you may need an upgrade just that much sooner depending upon what comes out in 2018 and 2019. The other reason to buy the Ryzen 7, of course, would be if you're doing more serious content creation, video editing, more live streaming of AAA games. It certainly is worth the money if those are your goals. But for just playing games and for casual content creation, the Ryzen 5 1600 is all that you need in 2017 and probably through most of 2018 as well. Now on to the motherboards. I have in front of me here 3 excellent MSI boards. We have the $80 B350 Gaming Pro, we have the $100 B350 Tomahawk, and then we have the one in this build, the $150 X370 Gaming Pro Carbon, all from MSI. Very nice boards, lots of features. Why is there a $150 X370 board in here instead of one of these others? Glad you asked. First, let me state that I will in the future do a full-line Ryzen motherboard comparison video with the A320, the B350, and the X370, and talk about suggestions for the entire Ryzen lineup of CPUs. That's not the purpose of this. We're only talking about what boards I would recommend for the Ryzen 5 1600 and Ryzen 7 1700 CPUs, so the A320 is not on the desk. Now, starting off, we have this $80 motherboard here. This is a micro ATX board, and it has the B350 chipset for $80. Now this is a fine choice and there's nothing wrong with choosing this board for this build, but I would caution you that when you put a small board into a larger case like that, you're going to end up with a lot of blank space around it because it doesn't actually extend to the full length of the mounting area. You can put a full-size ATX board, such as one of these, into that beautiful Crystal 570X case. This will leave a lot of empty space. It also has fewer expansion options, fewer add-in card options. It simply doesn't have all of the capability that I think you would want for a case of that size. For just $20 more, either the Tomahawk or the Gaming Plus B350, both about the same price, both about $100 or a little less, you get a full-size ATX board with more connectors, more expansion, and that will actually fill the case and look proper when the system is built. It is worth noting that both of these boards have RGB labels on them. They say, hey, we're RGB, but what that really means is they have the RGB lighting headers on them. You can add on lighting strips to put like around the edge of your case. They call MSI calls theirs Mystic lighting, Asus calls theirs Aurora lighting. It's basically the same thing. It's the 4-pin RGB light strip headers. The difference is when you step up to a board like this, you actually get more RGB lighting on the board, not just lighting strip headers. If you're spending $180 on a case because you want that beautiful RGB look, the price difference between a $100 B350 and a $150 X370 that has real RGB lighting on the board itself, in addition to the light strip headers, I think is a fairly small ask, especially when you consider it's a more featured board as well. Okay, you say, fair enough, but aren't there some boards that are in the $100 to $120 price range with RGB lighting on them? Yes, there are. I would still strongly consider the X370 board at least at $150. Would I pay $180 or $200 for this? No, absolutely not. But at $150, it's not a large jump over the premium lower end boards with RGB lighting, and you do get some extra features. Most notably, you get more USB ports, more serial ATA connectors than the B350 offers, and you get proper SLI and Crossfire support. Now, currently in 2017, Crossfire and SLI support with AMD and NVIDIA graphics cards is not that great. Too many games these days are not properly supporting it, and support is going down, not up. So why would I consider an X370 board? Because there is a chance that that's going to reverse with explicit multi-GPU adapter support in DirectX 12. We're in a transition period. Not enough people run Windows 10. We're not getting DirectX 12 only games at the moment. We're getting hybrid games that are DirectX 11 and DirectX 12. 2 years from now, I see that changing. DirectX 12 has something very, very important called explicit multi-adapter support. What this means is that unlike Crossfire and SLI, which in the past have required explicit driver support and application profile for every single game from AMD and NVIDIA, if the game wasn't programmed into the drivers, then it didn't work right. And it still doesn't work all that great because the current Crossfire and SLI technology is way old at this point, and it really needs to be replaced with DirectX 12 support. Here's why. With explicit multi-GPU adapter support in DirectX 12, not only does it not matter about the driver support directly for the game, it doesn't even matter what graphics cards you put in. This has been demonstrated. It does work, but we need the games to be updated to DirectX 12 only, and we need more people on Windows 10 for it to work. You can actually put a GTX 1060 next to an RX 580 in the same board and play a game, splitting the game across the two completely different graphics cards, and it works just fine. But the game has to be DirectX 12 only and has to be coded for explicit multi-GPU adapter support. I think that will come. I don't know when it will come. 2 years, 3 years, who knows? But something to consider is that, for example, the GTX 1060 doesn't support SLI. Doesn't matter. It will work with two graphics cards under DirectX 12's multi-GPU support. You will need an X370 board for that. If you're spending $1,200 on a premium system and the purpose of that system is to have future expandability, future upgradability, and a long period of ownership, I would spend the extra $50 for the X370 board. Now, I have given other advice in previous videos where I've said, oh, you don't need X370, B350 is fine. But some of those were less expensive systems or weren't meant to last. On the $800 Ryzen 5 1400 build that I did, the live stream I did the other day, I said, don't buy an X370, buy a B350, because that was at the $800 price point. This is the $1,200. At $1,200, considering the future that I see in DirectX 12 multi-GPU support, I think it's worth considering. It gives you the option. AMD has committed, and this is a very important point, AMD has committed to at least 4 years of support to the AM4 socket that is on these boards. Intel changes their socket every 2 years, and they've done that for a long time now. The upcoming Coffee Lake chips, for example, will not work in the current 200 series motherboards. If you have a Z270 with a current i7 in it, you're going to have to replace your motherboard for Coffee Lake. AMD has promised that at a minimum, 2020 will be the soonest they change sockets on us. If you look at their track record, they stand by that. The AM3 socket that predated AM4 lasted far longer than 4 years. AM2 before that, and so on. AMD has been holding on to sockets far longer than Intel now for nearly 20 years. So their track record indicates that they mean it. What this means is you could use this board for the next 5 or 6 years, and midway through that life, if you want a new CPU, maybe 3 years from now, you'll absolutely be able to upgrade, not just to Zen 2, but Zen 3. Which AMD has already said they're working on at the 7nm technology. Now I realize that's forward-looking statements, and we don't know for sure what's really going to happen. I mean, certainly this could all end up being wrong. But based upon AMD's track record in past, if you're looking for a machine that you don't have to mess with too much, that you can keep for many years to come, and you have $1,200 to spend, I would suggest that $150 is extremely reasonable for a very nice, full-featured board that you can grow with and possibly use extra graphics cards, add extra items, and upgrade the CPU without having to replace it. That's one of the advantages of Ryzen over Intel, and one of the reasons why I've been so excited about Ryzen since it launched is the fact that you're not necessarily going to have to replace your whole system, your whole motherboard and setup every 2 years if you want to upgrade your computer, whereas AMD is going to let you do that for at least the next 2 processor generations, probably 3, without changing the board. Now, before you think that MSI is the only brand I recommend, rest assured it is not. Now, MSI makes nice boards, and I had those 3 boards, which lets me talk about the different price points and chipsets. This particular board is from ASRock. It's the Gaming K4, and this is actually what's currently installed in my Ryzen 7 1700X test system. Most of the Ryzen 7 benchmarks you've seen on my channel recently were done on this board. In front of me, I have the Asus X370 Prime, a very nice $150 board. These are both $150. And if you're looking for an Asus board or an ASRock board in the $150 price range, excellent choices. Now, this Gigabyte Gaming K7 board is a bit more expensive. It's closer to $200, but it is also a more premium board. This actually has more RGB lights on it in terms of the memory dim slots, the PCI Express slots. There's a lighting strip up the side. If you're okay to spend an extra $50, it does have more RGB on it than these boards do. Now, they have a K5 as well. You can go down a bit on that if you want the $150 price point. But the $200 also exists here as well. For example, there is a ROG Strix board, X370, in the $200 price point, and it also has more RGB lighting on it and a different color scheme than this. Same performance, same basic features, but different styling, more RGB lighting. If you like the Gaming K4 and you want something a bit better, the Tai Chi board is an excellent choice, or the Fatality Pro board from ASRock. Which motherboard you choose is a very personal decision. Most of these boards have extremely similar features, and it really comes down to what you want personally, what look you like, what color scheme and RGB lighting layout that you look. There is effectively no performance difference between any of the boards. You're not going to get a faster or slower machine by choosing Gigabyte over Asus, over ASRock, over MSI. It's a feature set, brand preference, and style and color choice more than it is anything else, at least once you've chosen B350 versus X370. The final point that I want to make is that there's also no performance difference between B350 and X370. Your CPU is not going to magically run faster on an X370 board. You buy X370 for proper SLI and Crossfire support, for multi-GPU support. You buy it for more expansion ports, more M.2 slots. You buy it for more SATA ports, more USB ports. You don't buy it because it makes your chip faster. It doesn't. Both overclock, So please keep in mind that you can overclock your Ryzen CPU, and all Ryzen CPUs are unlocked in either B350 or X370. It is only A320 boards, which I have not covered here, that will not let you overclock your CPU. One last point on motherboards. I have in front of me two of the premium top-end boards from ASUS and MSI. This is the ASUS Republic of Gamers Crosshair 6 Hero motherboard, and this is the MSI X370 X-Power Titanium gaming board. What impressive names. These boards are in the $250 to $300 price range. Very nice boards. I currently have this installed in the machine underneath this desk. I did my first Ryzen 7 1700 build in that board. This board is going to get my Ryzen 7 1800X. To be completely honest, these have no place whatsoever in a $1,200 system build. They really don't have a place in a $1,500 build. However, the price point of these boards may make sense if you're looking at a $2,000 Ryzen 7 build. Ryzen 7 1700X or 1800X with a high-end cooler, lots of RAM, lots of storage, higher-end extreme enthusiast performance machines or professional content creation machines, such as I would use, justify these boards. And this is going to get my top-end 1800X chip, and that's going to be a new content creation machine for me. I only mention them because many people want to know, is it worth spending the extra money on a motherboard? Not for a $1,200 build, not for these boards, and for this particular system, it's not. Stick with the more mid-range boards. $150 price range is probably optimal for a $1,200 build, maybe up to $200 if you like the features, or maybe you're going a bit over $1,300 or $1,400 price range. Now we come to system RAM, everyone's favorite topic when it comes to AMD Ryzen systems. Quick note, Intel systems. The Intel Integrated Memory Controller and DDR4 platform are old enough at this point now where almost any DDR4 memory kit that it's rated at a given speed, say DDR4 3200, such as this Trident Z kit in front of me, is going to work in any Z270 motherboard without a problem. That has been standardized and fine for several years now. The AM platform from AMD, Ryzen chips, launched in March of 2017, and it's still very new. Some kits work better in some motherboards and vice versa. I have had differing levels of success running each of these different kits and some others I have over on the shelf in different motherboards. I cannot give you specific advice about which specific kit is guaranteed to work on any given processor because A, you may use a different motherboard, B, you may have a different level of overclock, and C, the kits are not always the same. You may, for example, order 16 gigabytes of Vengeance LPX RAM from Corsair. It's sold to you DDR4 3000 with a CL or CAS rating of 15. But the actual chips that are on that module may be different from kit to kit. They are selling you a spec and a speed, not specific chips. There are different memory chips which have better and worse compatibility with AMD. Now, having said all of that, what are you supposed to do when trying to figure out what RAM do I buy for my system? Because a lot of this information is not easily available. If you go to Amazon and Newegg and look at the listings, most of those listings don't tell you which chips, which boards, which RAM modules. Let me make this really simple. If you want guaranteed compatibility in most, but not all, AM4 motherboards, and you want to run DDR4 3200, FlareX RAM from G.Skill is your best choice. Now that doesn't work in every single board, but it works in most of them. And it works in most of them without having to tweak any settings, play around with it. You put it in, you set the XMP or DOCP, depending upon the motherboard brand, the latter being ASUS, and it just works without a problem. The MSI boards, the ASUS boards that I've put it into, both the B350, the $89 B350 Micro ATX board, as well as the Crosshair Hero 6 board and several boards in between, no problems whatsoever. The ASRock Gaming K4 board that I showed you earlier will not run that RAM at 3200 megahertz. It will run it at 2933. The $200 X370 Tai Chi board from ASRock runs perfectly 3200. And that's a good example of how two very similar boards from the same company, one will work and one won't. Likewise, from Gill, this DDR4 3200 kit, the Evo X, is also designed for AMD systems. I've had good luck in several different boards with this RAM. Didn't work in that gaming K4 board at anything over 2933, but it did run fine in the MSI board as well as the Asus B350 Prime at DDR4 3200. Then we come over to Corsair, which is interesting because I own multiple kits of Corsair RAM. I have RAM ranging from 2133 all the way up to 3200, and it's very inconsistent about which kit works in which board. If you don't want to mess with it, let me offer you this thought. The actual performance difference between DDR4 2666, which is guaranteed to work because that's the JEDEC spec, and anything over that 3000, 3200 is less than you might think. Where faster RAM makes a difference is content creation, software compiling, virtual machines, heavy file transfers, file compression, decompression makes a difference. Gaming, very minor. I tested Ghost Recon Wildlands, a very, very demanding game, requires a lot of computer power. I tested it on my Ryzen 7 1700X CPU on DDR4 2666 and then again DDR4 3200. There was exactly 1 frame per second difference in performance between 2666 and 3200. Now, different games will show differing amounts. Some show no difference at all, some show 2 or 3 frames per second. But if the whole topic of trying to figure RAM out is complicated and you don't want to spend the money on something like the FlareX RAM or the Evo X, which are Ryzen designed RAM, these are meant to be more compatible than the others, which were originally designed for Intel, just buy 2666 and be very happy with it. I do want to make one note of disclaimer. This RGB Vengeance RAM from Corsair. Now, the link in the video description below takes you to the DDR4 3000 because that's actually, on the date of filming this video, $4 less expensive than the 2666. But the RAM on my desk is actually 2600. This kit is DDR4 3000. When I do, this is what Corsair sent me, which is why I have 2666. When I do the beauty build and show you the lights, I'll have the Corsair Vengeance RGB in. When I do the performance testing, I'll have the DDR4 3000 in. I only make the point because sooner or later somebody's going to notice that that box says 2666 on the top. They are otherwise extremely similar. They're both Vengeance, they're both the same line. The only difference is the shroud has the RGB lights on the top. Otherwise, they're pretty much the same. When I do Windows performance, I will put different speeds of RAM into this system. I will put 2666, I'll do 3000, and I'll also test 3200, and I'll report back how well in that X370 Gaming Carbon Pro the Gill RAM and the FlareX RAM works as well. But that'll be in part 5 of this video series. The next question is, how much RAM should you buy? Putting aside which brand and which speed to buy, do you need 16? Should you buy more? Should you buy less? Let me offer you this thought. In 2017, if you've got a $1,200 budget for a computer, 16 gigabytes should be the minimum. Yes, there are people who can get away with using less. If you think that you only need 8 gigabytes of RAM, if your use case is such that 8 gigabytes is enough, I would make the argument that you don't need this computer. A several-year-old i5 with a GTX 1050 that plays League of Legends, Dota 2, Counter-Strike Global Offensive, that machine only needs 8 gigs of RAM and it does it just fine. But if your goal is to play Prey, Battlefield 1, Grand Theft Auto 5, Ghost Recon Wildlands, you want to have a nice $200, $300, $400 graphics card, 16 gigabytes absolutely for that use case should be the minimum. 32 isn't really required for gaming today, although in the next 2 years or so I see that happening. So if you buy a kit with 2 memory modules such as these, and you buy a motherboard that has 4 memory slots, you can buy one kit today and a second kit in the future in order to upgrade. But as far as RAM goes, 16 absolutely is the minimum for a $1,200 machine, at least in my opinion. Now, should you consider buying 32 gigs today? Now, for pure gaming, no. But it's worth considering that if you want to live stream your games, that takes up extra RAM. OBS, for example, if you are streaming your game, takes up several more gigabytes all by itself, especially if you're recording it to the hard drive while you're doing it. And then if you have anything running in the background, Discord servers, chat servers, or web browsers, maybe you're on multiple monitors, also needs more RAM. In those cases, 32 gigabytes may very well make sense. Content creation, software development, running virtual machines, all those sorts of tasks would strongly indicate that 32 gigabytes makes sense. you can now buy for reasonable prices 32 gigabytes in 2 memory modules. You don't have to buy 4 anymore. And if you are one of those users, besides the fact that perhaps the Ryzen 7 1700 would make more sense, because if you're going to spend the money on 32 gigs of RAM, I would strongly encourage you to get a Ryzen 7 1700 for the extra $80. Buy a 32 gig kit with 2 DIMMs, because it always offers you the option to upgrade. Ryzen supports 64, so you could install 32 now, and if you're that kind of user, 2 or 3 years from now, you can upgrade to 64 without having to change your motherboard or throw out your existing RAM. I mentioned earlier that Ryzen is built for the future. They're going to keep this socket for a long time to come. They've built in 64 gigs of RAM support. It really is a nice platform. One final thought regarding RAM speed that I'd like to mention. If you buy a DDR4 3200 kit and it does not work at 3200 in whichever board you end up with, all is not lost. In all of the boards that I've been testing DDR4 3200 in with the current BIOSes, they at least run at 2933. So you don't have to turn them all the way down to the minimum spec. Usually they only have to come down 1 notch at the same settings and then they work just fine. Even in that gaming K4 ASRock board, for example, the Flare X RAM, it didn't have to come down to 2666 or 2400. It ran at 2933 just fine, stable in tests and benchmarks. So if you buy the Corsair DDR4 3000 and it doesn't work at 2933 in your board, it'll run at 2666. Buy the Corsair DDR4 3200, and if it doesn't run at 3200, run it at 2933. As I said, in most situations for the average user, it is not actually that big of a difference. If you find a really good deal for $10, $20, $30 less expensive for 2666, buy it, save the money, and spend it somewhere else in your computer. Last but certainly not least, RGB RAM. Now we're installing the Corsair Vengeance RGB RAM into this system, but as alternative choices, you can choose the Trident Z RGB RAM from G.Skill, or from Giel, you can choose the Evo X RAM. You'll notice that there is no RAM in this box. This particular kit is a 32 gigabyte 4x8 kit that's installed in my Ryzen 7 1700 system under the desk. I didn't want to pull it out to put on the desk since I'm using it. This RAM is DDR4 3200 and it's installed in the Asus Crosshair Hero 6 board, but it's running at 2933 because it is 4 DIMMs. And this is an important point regarding memory speed, is oftentimes you have to take the memory speed down 1 notch when you install 4 memory modules versus 2. If you take 2 of those out, it runs just fine at DDR4 3200 in that board. But with 4, it does not. And that's generally true of all the RAM. They all have to come down 1 memory notch, 1 speed when you install. So if in the future you want to upgrade from 16 to 32, it'll probably cost you 1 memory speed from 3200 to 2933 or 2933 down to 2666. That being said, as I said, it's a very minor performance difference. It doesn't bother me. So that's what I'm running that in, that Trident Z RGB RAM kit. Next up, we have the choice of the case for this system. Now here I have the Corsair Crystal 570X RGB case turned on its side, and I've removed both glass side panels. The reason for that is because they completely reflect the light, and in a bright filming setup like this, it actually doesn't look that good. You really need to have the lights turned down and the lights inside the case on in order to have those beautiful beauty shots. I am going to do my best to do those in the last video. Once everything's done, do some beauty shots of this, get all the lighting set up really nicely. I'm not going to talk too much about the RGB lighting right now. You can see plenty of videos on YouTube. If you simply search YouTube for Corsair Crystal 570X, there are plenty of gorgeous beauty shots of this case. Instead, I'm going to talk about the features and function and some alternative case choices you may want to consider. Before I show you the features of this case, one quick note on value for the money. Lowest price is not necessarily where the deal is. If you find value in 3 RGB fans included, 4 tempered glass panels, 1 on the front, 1 on the top, and both sides. The fact that the Corsair logo in front of the power supply down there lights up. The fact that it's got an excellent cable management system in the back, which I'll show you in a minute. It's got mounting points for various drives in the back. If you find the appearance, the form of this case to be attractive, you want to put your system on top of your desk and you want to put some effort into that RGB lighting, this is a very good value for the money. On the other hand, if you simply want a mid-tower case to put your parts in and then stick it under your desk, never to be looked at again, Frankly, this is way overkill and I would not buy it if that's your goal. There are other cases we'll talk about in a minute. I just want to comment regarding the value because many people in the previous video said that case is too expensive. It is if you don't value the glass and the RGB. It's not if you do. So it's very much a personal decision. Now regarding features, as I said before, it comes with three 120mm RGB fans right here in the front, already pre-wired to the controller. The buttons are here on the top. There is room for two additional 120 or 140mm fans on the roof of the case, either exhausting or blowing air in, and there's room for a 120mm fan here on the back. Now, while there are room for two 140mm fans on the top, I have learned since I filmed the first video, there's actually not room to mount a 280mm radiator on the top. It's only designed for a 240. So for example, the Corsair H100i V2 for about $100 would work perfectly in the roof of this case, but the H110i, the 280mm version, would not. Something to keep in mind if you're looking at going liquid cooling in this case. Now, if you decide to upgrade to a Ryzen 5 1600X and use the Corsair H55 that I showed you earlier, the 120mm fan mount here on the back would work perfectly. Install the radiator and the fan there exhausting backwards and install one or two more fans on the roof blowing air down. Or, as an option, have the radiator bring air into the case and install one or two fans on the roof blowing up to exhaust the hot air out. So you'd have air in from the front, air in from the back, and exhaust out the top. It does offer you some very nice flexible options. If you really love that RGB, keep in mind that while the Corsair liquid coolers don't come with RGB fans, you absolutely can replace those fans with RGB fans. Corsair sells a wide variety of fans. You can replace the fan in your liquid cooler. You can then wire that fan. It just plugs into the radiator just like the included fan does. The mounting holes are the same. And then there is a pack on the back that you would plug that RGB fan into, so you can even have an RGB liquid cooler if you want. One more note about fans. If you decide to buy the Corsair H100i V2 liquid cooler, rather than mounting it on the top, you also have the option to mount it in the front. The three fans included in this case are SP, not AF fans. That's important. SP fans are static pressure and what come with liquid coolers. AF are airflow. You can use these existing fans with the radiator. Simply don't use the fans that come with the H100i V2 and instead replace the bolts or replace the screws in these fans with the ones that come with the radiator because they're longer. They'll run through the radiator, which you'll place back here, into the existing fans. So you can leave these RGB fans in place while mounting your 240mm radiator here if you want to have it set up as an intake from the front rather than put it on the roof of the case. I think that's a nice touch from Corsair that they went ahead and gave you the SP fans so that you could keep them and install a front-mounted radiator. Final point on this side before I turn the case around, I mentioned full-size versus micro ATX boards before. This bay here is a full-size ATX bay, so if you buy the motherboard that I'm going to be installing, you'll see that it takes up that entire space. I also talked about the B350 micro ATX board, the $80 one from MSI before. Keep in mind that while that will absolutely work in here, the bottom third of this area will be completely bare. There will be nothing covering that metal. Now you may not care, but if you're buying a nice case like this and you want something that's pretty, I would get a full-size ATX board to use all of that bay. Otherwise, the bottom third of your space is going to be completely empty, no circuit board, nothing, just black metal down there. I have now turned the case around and you can see the back where the drive mounting locations, cable management, power supply, and other options are located. If you look right here, you will see two 2.5-inch drive bays. These are snap mounts. Basically, you can slide the SSD in. They're toolless essentially. So you can put two 2.5-inch drives here, primarily SSDs. Next to that, you can see the RGB light controller here. There are 6 plugs in here. The 3 here are currently used by the 3 fans in the front, and there are 3 more plugs here. So because there are 6 fan mounting locations, 1 in the back and 2 in the top, you can add 3 more RGB lights or fans and plug them in here, and that's controlled by either these 3 switches right here, or there's actually 3 on the top of the case, which are accessible when everything is closed up. On this side of the case right here, you will see a brown cardboard box. This is what all the screws and other little connectors and zip ties comes in. That just pops out. That is one of the 3.5-inch drive bays. Below it, you'll see the second 3.5-inch drive bay. You'll see me use one of those during the build to put the 3 terabyte hard drive into. So if you install the motherboard that I'll be using in this build, you've got 2 M.2 slots on that board for solid state drives, 2 more 2.5-inch drive bays for 2.5-inch drives, and then 2 3.5-inch drive bays for hard drives. That's the sum total expansion available in this case. Now, if you need more hard drive space, let me suggest external USB 3 hard drives. They're very quick. I use them myself for a variety of applications. So if you need more storage than this, you can always go external, but that's what you have available inside this case. The next thing we have is a cable management bar right here. There are actually just screws right here where this comes off. Underneath this are the rubber grommets where the pass-throughs on the other side are. The front panel connectors, drive, power, and data connectors can all be run through here. So when I do the build, I'll actually have this on both sides as we do the build. I'll take this off and show it to you, but essentially all the cables are underneath there, and then they run through the rubber grommets on the front. You can see down on the very bottom where the power supply goes. It does mount through the back of the case and then screws into the back right here. This actual metal shroud here does not come off. This right here, by the way, is the lighting pack for the Corsair logo. It is also open from the front here. You can, if need be, run cables from your power supply through the front up across the top rather than using the cable management scheme. If you run out of room there, it is always an option, although that will affect the appearance. The idea is to run everything behind and through the grommets to completely leave the front clear, but you have that option if you need it. Now, the RM850X power supply that we're going to be installing will not have any problem fitting. You can see this is actually a quite long bay. You can put virtually any power supply in there. They gave you room even if you want to put a 1,000-watt power supply in here, you certainly could, although for this type of case, it's probably overkill. Finally, we have the back of the case. You can see on the bottom where the power supply goes. Here's where your video cards and expansion goes. The 120mm fan mount location, either for just a straight fan or the liquid cooler radiator, and then the pass-through for where the ATX ports go. Now, it's worth noting, if you look here, you'll see that there's space beyond where the video cards mount. If you install a large oversized graphics card, and the Gaming X graphics card from MSI that I'll be installing qualifies because the card is taller than the slot. There's plenty of room here for any of the aftermarket cards. Gaming X, the Duke, the EVGA for the Win cards, for example, the Gigabyte Aorus cards, whichever your preference is, they're all going to fit. This case is wide enough in order to handle all of them. Here we have my best attempt to show you the back of 4 different cases at different price points. On the right side of the screen, you've got the Corsair Crystal 570X RGB case. Right next to it, here, we have the NZXT S340 case, or at least a close approximation of it. This is actually an iBuyPower machine rather than a strict retail S340 case from NZXT. But iBuyPower uses a lot of NZXT cases, and from looking at the pictures and looking at the specs, it's very, very close to what you would buy at retail, starting at about $70, running up to about $100. Now, I'm showing you the back of these cases both to show you the height and width of the cases, as well as show you how much room they have for ports, expansion, etc. It's not meant to be a full case review. I'm just showing you some examples here. I'll take them off the desk in a second. But this is an iBuyPower machine with a customized version, and since it's the only NZXT case that I have, it's the best I can do for you at the moment. Hopefully NZXT sends me some products to review. I'd like to review the retail version of this. I'd like to review their liquid coolers. We'll see if I can get some of those from them. Moving here, we have the Corsair Carbide Spec 01 case. Now, this particular machine is my FX 8300 build. This is a $600 build that I did earlier this year. That's actually what's physically inside this machine. You'll notice that this is shorter and narrower than these cases, but it has the benefit of being between $50 to $60, so it's much less expensive. Could you build a Ryzen 5 1600 machine in a $50 case? Absolutely. It's not going to have RGB lighting, it's not, all the shiny glass and pretty, but it is just fine. It does the job just fine. Now, it has fewer fan mounting places and it's not quite as versatile, but it really is just fine. And if you don't care about the form, if you don't care about the glass and the RGB lighting, something like this absolutely could be considered for this type of build. Just be aware that it's not as tall, it's not as thick, and so it's just not going to have as much room inside for as many things. And then finally, going all the way over, you have the Cooler Master MasterBox 5. Now the MasterBox 5 is actually on its way out. I've used it. My i7 7700K build is in there. That's a $50 case, and for $50 that is an incredible value for the money. But it's shortly being replaced, and Cooler Master has informed me that they will be sending me their MasterBox Lite 5 RGB case. Oh boy. But my understanding is it will have a retail price of under $100. That's not confirmed yet, but it will be very shortly. It just isn't on the day of this video, or at least when I'm recording it. But it's going to be much less expensive. Take a look at the width and height of this case compared to the Corsair Carbide, the NZXT, and then the Crystal 570X. It's the closest, in my opinion, to the Crystal 570X. Now, the base version of this case has no RGB lighting and is $50. In fact, you can buy the MasterBox Lite 5 on Amazon and Newegg today for $49.99. For that money, you get a much larger case than most of the other companies give you. I actually quite like that case. I'm going to be using the upcoming MasterBox Lite 5 for my Ryzen 5 1600X build at some point in the future. There might be something special with that system. Stay tuned for details. I'd like to take a minute to take a closer look at this iBuyPower pre-built machine here. Not just for the case that it comes in, which is a fine choice if you're interested in building your own system, but also for what it is and the price. I'll have a more extensive comparison with this at some point in the future. This is a Ryzen 7 1700 desktop PC that you can buy on Amazon right now today, at least when I'm recording this, for $1,169. It's $30 less expensive than the custom build we're putting together. And it has a Ryzen 7 1700, and the custom build we're putting together has a Ryzen 5 1600. Wait a minute, you say. What in the world are we bothering with the custom build? This is an NZXT S340 case. It's got multiple lighting options included. It's got an SSD included. Why buy anything else? It even comes with a very nice graphics card. Now, I've changed it because I use it for testing, but this machine comes with an AMD RX 580 4GB graphics card, which is in many respects a little bit better than the 3GB GTX 1060 that I've spec'd in the $1,200 build. Now, before you say, this is crazy, why build, just go buy this, I want you to keep a couple of points in mind. First of all, this system comes with 8 gigs of RAM. The $1,200 custom build has 16. This system comes with a 120GB SSD. We've got a 275GB SSD in the custom. This comes with a 1TB hard drive. Our custom has a 3. This comes with a 600 watt, reasonably generic power supply versus the Corsair 80 plus gold 850 watt fully modular power supply in our custom. As nice as the NZXT case is here, it's not the Corsair Crystal 570X. You could swap that case out and knock $100 off. If you switched to the NZXT S340 in our $1,200 custom build, that would take you all the way down to $1,100 with that one change. Our custom build has an X370 full-size Gaming Pro Carbon motherboard. This has a micro ATX Asus B350 Prime M. It's a good board, and I do recommend it for its price, $89, great board, but it's not the same thing. So there's differences. It's also worth noting that iBuyPower does not provide you with the Wraithspire RGB cooler that you get with retail Ryzen 7 machines. They don't even give you the non-RGB version, because standard, a retail Ryzen 7 comes with a nice RGB cooler. What comes in this machine? This, the much older AMD generic cooler. I kid you not. Beautiful case, glass in the front, multiple colored lighting strip in the top, red lit fans, and they put this fan on it. Yeah. Now, this is actually reasonably quiet. I was surprised as small as this fan is, it was very quiet. I didn't have a problem with it. It's also a fairly large metal block, and it does have a copper base. But I took it off and I stuck the Spire on there. Would I run at stock speeds with this cooler? Yes. If you don't overclock, this is fine. If you overclock, I would change it out for something like a Hyper 212 Evo or the Pure Rock, or something similar to that. I wouldn't keep this if you want to overclock, but at stock speeds, it's just fine. Random side note regarding RAM, that is 16 gigabytes of Ripjaws 5, which I didn't show you on the desk with RAM earlier, but that's DDR4 3000 installed in there. Works first time, every time, using the automatic overclocking settings on the motherboard. Now, it's not called XMP in ASUS's B350 boards. They call it DOCP. Same thing. Go into the BIOS, into the overclocking setting, simply switch it from automatic down to DOCP. It set the RAM automatically to DDR4 2933 because Ryzen doesn't actually use 3000. It uses 3200, 2933, 2656. It set it to the CL rating of 15, which is what that RAM is. Never had an issue with it. No problems whatsoever. So in most of the modern boards, you can run these memory kits at the proper speed if you update your BIOS. I did have to update the BIOS. When I got this machine a couple of weeks ago, it came with the launch BIOS on the motherboard. There were like 6 or 7 BIOS revisions. Make sure you update your AM4 board's BIOS before you start actually using it. The more astute among you will notice that there is in fact not an RX graphics card in this machine. I took it out and sold it actually. Because of the cryptocurrency mining situation going on, RX graphics cards are selling for over retail value, even used. That's currently a 1050 Ti in there that I'm simply using for benchmarking and testing. I've had a variety of cards in here. For what it's worth, the MSI Duke overclocked 1080 Ti fit in here just fine. The 600 watt power supply included ran it just fine. I did have to dig through there and pull out an extra power cable, which is fine. It actually comes with 4 PCI Express power cables, even though it is a fairly basic 600 watt power supply. So even in this small case, the big oversized 1080 Ti Duke did fit in this machine just fine. Graphics cards. Probably the most commented item beneath part 1 of this video series was, why in the world does a $1,200 build have a GTX 1060 3GB card? Great question, glad you asked. I'm going to answer that in detail. As I record this in the summer of 2017, we are currently in the midst of a graphics card shortage due to the Ethereum cryptocurrency mining situation. If you're not familiar with what this is, essentially there is a digital currency called Ethereum, very similar to Bitcoin, although mined differently. Graphics cards are used to generate it. It's essentially math that has to be computed at a rapid pace. The RX 580 and the GTX 1070 are both very, very good at computing this. In fact, they're so good that those cards are worth more to cryptocurrency miners than they are to gamers. The normal price of a GTX 1070 is about $350. That's what it should be going for, but it's not. The lowest price GTX 1070 today, when I'm filming this video, is $450. It isn't worth $450. More on that in a minute. The RX 580, when it launched a few months ago, was $200 even for the 4GB card and $220 for the 8GB card. For those prices, absolutely, I would have an 8GB RX 580 in here without any doubt whatsoever. In fact, it's exactly the same price as this 3GB card is, and the 8GB RX 580 is a bit faster. Not a ton, but it is, and it has more VRAM for the future. But it's not. I just checked Newegg 5 minutes ago. $350 is the lowest selling RX 580 4GB card. $400 is the lowest selling RX 580 8GB card. They are going for nearly double what they were just a few months ago at launch. So if you're one of the people who made a comment beneath part 1 saying, why is an RX 580 not in here? I understand. Perhaps you bought one at launch, you looked at the prices then, and you haven't checked regularly because you don't do this for a living. Go look at the prices. You might fall down and be shocked. They are going for crazy money. Right now, the only cards that are actually worth buying for the performance they offer are the 3GB 1060, which can currently be had on Newegg for $219, $220, or the GTX 1080, which is currently $499, $500. The 1080 is $50 more expensive than the 1070 right now, and from a gamer's point of view, is 25% faster. It is absolutely worth every single penny of that extra $50. 10% more money, 25% more performance. That's a no-brainer. Now, the reason why the 1080s aren't in demand for the cryptocurrency miners is because of the VRAM. Doesn't matter for gaming, it's fine, but these use GDDR5X, which is faster than the GDDR5 on 1070s, but it has a higher latency. Doesn't matter for gaming, the higher transfer rate makes up for it. But for cryptocurrency mining, it actually makes these cards worse than the 1070s, which is why these are normal price and the 1070s aren't. Now, I've previously covered 3 versus 6 gigabyte in the past, but if you're wondering why there's not a 6 gig card here for future-proofing, it's because it is not worth $65 to get that extra 3 gigabytes of VRAM. First of all, I don't think that extra VRAM at a card of this performance level is actually that beneficial. You'll run out of compute power before you run out of VRAM. Even games like GTA 5, which say they need 3.3 gigs of VRAM at very high detail at 1080p, yeah, they really don't. I've tested it. It plays exactly the same frame rate, not counting the 10% card performance difference from 3 to 6 gigabyte card. There's a video on my channel covering that in detail. Now, it is worth noting that the 6 gigabyte 1060 is 10% faster in compute performance because it has 10% more CUDA cores on it. There's actually more compute power on a 6 gigabyte 1060 than a 3 gigabyte. But it is not worth spending $65 more. That is 30% more money for 10% more performance. Sure, it has extra VRAM. It's not worth that price. I mean, you can do it if you want, but you are paying extra for very small performance difference that really isn't going to make a difference. And as far as saying, yeah, but if you want to run high or ultra max detail and you want to play games at higher resolution, then you'll need the extra VRAM. Great, but they won't run on a 1060. It's not powerful enough. Ghost Recon Wildlands, if you want to play at ultra detail, yeah, you need more than 3 gigs of VRAM. Try ultra detail at 1080p on a GTX 1060. 30, 35 frames per second at best with minimums in the teens. It's not playable. Lower the detail down to high, and now you no longer need more than 3 gigs of VRAM, and it plays over 60 frames per second. This is a very important point. Yes, you can make current games go over 3 gigs, but this card won't run them at those detail settings, so what difference does it make? You need a 1080 to play Ghost Recon Wildlands at ultra detail at playable performance, and it has 8 gigs of VRAM, so it's simply not an issue. I covered this extensively in my 3 versus 6 gig card. It was true in 2016 when I published that video. It's true today. The 6 gig card isn't worth it unless the price premium is only maybe $20, $25. Now, I've mentioned that before as well. A few months ago, it narrowed to just $20. The 3 gigabyte cards were about $180, and then the 6 gigabyte cards briefly touched $200 on Amazon. At that time, I made the comment on my channel, absolutely buy the 6 gigabyte card. When there's only a $20 price difference, the performance alone of the faster card makes sense. But that was at $20 price difference, not at $65 difference. Now I realize that's a lot of information, so let me summarize it for you. Pretending for a minute that prices magically returned to normal tomorrow, what would be a fair price for each of the cards? The RX 570 down at the bottom should be in the $160 to $170 price range for the 4 gigabyte version of that card. $200 to $220 for the 4 gigabyte RX 580. $220 to maybe $260 for the factory overclock cards for the 8 gigabyte RX 580. Anything up to about $220 or $230 for the 3 gigabyte 1060. No more than about $260, maybe $265 for the 6 gigabyte 1060. No more than $350 for a 1070. No more than $500 for a 1080. And if you're so inclined, the 1080 Ti's, which might be a little bit much for this particular build, but if you're interested, $700 is about what they should cost as well. Only some of those cards are actually available in August 2017 at anything remotely close to those prices. The 1080, the 1080 Ti, the 3 gigabyte 1060. None of the RX cards, the 6 gig and the 1070 are available anywhere close. So that's why the 3 gigabyte card is here. Not that the others are bad cards, but the prices are not worth it for their levels of performance. One piece of information that's going to age in this video very quickly is RX Vega. Now, RX Vega has been announced, but it has not launched yet. It's actually launching next week from when I'm recording this video. RX Vega 56 is supposed to be $399, and RX Vega 64 is supposed to be $499. The current rumors, I do not have either Vega card, by the way, full disclosure, but the current rumors and what I'm hearing from other people is that the RX Vega 56 for $399 is very competitive with the GTX 1070, maybe a little faster, and the RX Vega 64 at $499 is very competitive, actually a little bit faster than the GTX 1080. It's worth noting that RX Vega is going to be spectacular for cryptocurrency mining. I have already talked to some people who have been playing around with that, and my understanding is that it exceeds 70 mega hashes per second. Some people are getting on the liquid-cooled overclocked version, which is more than 500, mind you, closer to 100 mega hashes per second. Now that number doesn't mean anything if you're not a cryptocurrency miner, but if those numbers turn out to be true, those cards will sell out on the first day and they will stay sold out. Cryptocurrency miners at those hash rates will pay $7, $8, or more $100 for those cards. They will not stay in stock at the $500 price range. If you're interested in RX Vega, buy one the minute they're available for pre-order, or snatch one up at retail price as soon as you can get one, because if those numbers hold true, they will not stay on shelves for very long. Now let me insert my standard disclaimer here. They are not launched yet. I have not been briefed. No, I'm not under NDA. I have not been sampled those cards. So I am simply going off of publicly available information and chats that I've had with people who have played around with cards. But my understanding, at least what I've been told, no firsthand experience, those cards are going to be absolute amazing when it comes to compute power for everything from scientific applications through cryptocurrency mining, which means it may be very hard to get one for your custom build. Having said all that, let's pretend like the only two cards available for the moment are these two. $220 for a 3GB 1060 or $500 for a 8GB 1080. Is it worth spending the extra about $280 or so? That depends. Do you want to play AAA games such as Battlefield 1, Ghost Recon Wildlands, The Division, Prey, the upcoming Call of Duty World War II, and other such AAA games at 1440p at high detail or better at 60 plus frames per second? You'll need the 1080. I cannot overemphasize this point. AAA games, 1440p, high quality settings. First of all, at those detail settings and that resolution, the 3GB buffer really isn't enough. The compute power of a 1060 also really isn't enough either. Oh sure, there's a small handful of games that it will play. Actually, Grand Theft Auto 5 would do pretty well on this card at 1440p at high detail rather than very high because of the VRAM issue. But that game is nearly 2 years old now. The new games, especially coming out Christmas 2017, if you want to play the games coming out over the next 6 months, you're really looking at 1080p gaming with this card for AAA games. Now, esports and casual are a completely different matter. Do you want to play Overwatch at 1440p at high detail at way over 60 frames per second? This card will do it just fine. Do you want to play League of Legends, Dota 2, Counter-Strike Global Offensive, Rainbow Six Siege, actually I put in the esports category, StarCraft 2, Diablo 3. Do you want to play Minecraft? Do you want to play any game that is not overly demanding, that isn't one of those $100 million budget titles? 1440p, this card actually does just fine. World of Tanks, World of Warships, stuff like that, War Thunder. Now, if you want to play AAA games at 1080p, this card's just fine. Even Ghost Recon Wildlands, set at the high detail, the 3GB buffer is just fine. Mass Effect Andromeda, it's just fine. Now, one thing this card won't do is age on those games particularly well. The card's actually already a year old. It came out the summer of 2016. So if you're looking to buy a card that will last you for 3 years in AAA games, this isn't it. That is. If you're playing at 1080p and you want to have a card that's going to last you for 3 years at high detail, you'll need to buy a 1080. 18 months from now, Christmas 2018, you're going to start seeing games this struggles with. Now, if you did buy the 6GB card, it would hold on a little bit more, but with only 10% more compute power, while the extra VRAM buffer is nice, it just doesn't have the compute power. When the new games start coming out 18 months from now, you're going to run into a compute power problem. Now, you can always take the games that come out then and run them at medium or low detail, and if you don't care about that, then by all means, you should actually be fine with this a bit longer. But high detail 1080p, you really have 18 months left in this card at most. I do think you may get 3 years in the 1080. Of course, your mileage may vary and we'll have to see what happens. If you're still trying to decide whether the $280 is worth spending on the 1080 versus the 1060, let me give you one more thought. The 1080 is nearly double the performance of the 3GB 1060. Not quite, it's about 90 to 95% faster. In part one, actually, I commented that it was 70% faster. That was my brain thinking of the 1070. The 1070 is between 60 to 70% faster than the 3 gig and 50 to 60% faster than the 6 gig version of the card, just as a clarification. The 1080 is between 90 to 95% faster than the 3 gig 1060. Lots of numbers to keep track of in my head, but I did look it up just a second ago. So you're looking at nearly, but not quite double the performance. That is why if you set this card to ultra detail in Ghost Recon Wildlands, you're looking at 35 frames per second, but you can set it here to ultra detail and you're looking at closer to 60 frames per second. Not quite, very high is much more playable. You get closer to 70, 75 frames a second at very high, but this card is monstrously faster than this one is. So when you're looking at the future, if this card gives you 18 months, that's why I say this will give you 3 years. It's nearly double the performance. Sure, it's $280 now, but you get that wonderful high level of performance for a much longer period of time. You get 8 gigabytes of VRAM buffer. You no longer have to worry about how much VRAM your games are using up. Now for a Ryzen 5 build, I wouldn't bother with a 1080 Ti. They're about $200 more, and they are 35% faster than this. Dollar for dollar, they're actually worth it. But if you're doing that, you should be in a Ryzen 7, and that's a whole different price category. If you're watching this video in the future, and you can find a 1070 for around $350, that's a deal, and I would buy it. And as I said before, RX 580 in the mid-200s, those are deals. But for now, here's your choices. One final point on graphics cards. The links to Amazon and Newegg down in the description below are not going to be to these two specific cards. Instead, they'll be to all the 1060 and 1080 graphics cards. The prices are changing constantly. The stock is changing constantly. It's a very fluid market at the moment. Now, I am fully aware that the Gaming X MSI card is not currently $220. They do have a single fan card from MSI for $230. EVGA has one for $220, but those prices are going to change in a couple of days anyway, and there'll be Gigabyte had one a couple days ago, but it sold out. My recommendation, and I've said this before on my channel where I've tested many different graphics cards I've put up on the desk and I've shown benchmarks, there is very little to almost no performance difference between any of the 1060, 1070, and 1080 graphics cards. Buy the brand you prefer, buy the look, color, and style that you prefer, and honestly, buy based on price because they are so close to each other in performance. Next up, storage, solid state drives and hard drives. Here you can see we have the 3 terabyte Seagate Barracuda drive we're putting into this machine. And then actually right here is the M.2 Crucial MX300 275 gig solid state drive. Now there's several topics to talk about here. One is, do you need an SSD? Yes, that was easy. 2, how much SSD do you need? That's a little more complicated. I actually think the 480 to 525 gigabyte size is better for most people, but it didn't fit within the budget, so I'll talk about that in a minute. 240 to 275 is also an acceptable option for some people. It's why it's in here. I wouldn't go lower than that. Don't mess around with the 120s. They're not large enough to be effective. If you're custom building, the price difference between a 120 and a 240 is fairly small, and the 240 provides 250% more free space once Windows 10 is actually installed, so don't mess around with the smaller drives. You certainly don't need more than the 500 gig drives unless you just have the money to pay for them, but if you do, then there's probably some other things I would upgrade in this machine first, such as going to a Ryzen 7, going to the GTX 1080, and so on. So somewhere in the 240 to 480 gigabyte size is the sweet spot. Which drive should you buy? It doesn't matter. So long as you pick from one of the 10 drives that I showcased a couple of days ago in my which SSD should you buy, a selection of which, not all, but a selection of which are here, then you're going to get awesome, amazing performance. You will not notice any difference whether you buy an Ultra 2, MX300, 850 EVO, Western Digital Blue, a Mushkin drive, take your pick. The real world performance of these drives is so close, they are virtually indistinguishable. I don't think I could tell the difference even if I had 5 identical machines and 5 of these drives in them, and you said, okay, figure out which is which, sit down and use the machine. If I'm not allowed to look at what's installed on them, and keep in mind this is coming from somebody who owns and uses these drives. They're very close to each other. Even in the benchmarks that I showed in that video, there is at most a 20% performance difference between the fastest and slowest among the 10 recommended drives. Now, one of the questions people asked beneath that video was, so all SSDs are within 20% of each other? No, the 10 I recommended are. There were drives that were dramatically slower. Now I showed some older ones in the benchmarks, but I didn't show the SanDisk SSD Plus. The Ultra 2 is great, the SSD Plus not so much. I didn't show the AMD R3 Radeon drive. I have a 240 gig version of that. Now, they don't really sell those much anymore, at least in the US. They've been discontinued, so I didn't bother with it. I have one, I benchmarked it. It's pretty slow, actually. I wouldn't bother. There are several other models. The 750 Evo, for example, is, yeah, I would skip that as well. The older BX200 that predates the MX300, for example, I have a couple of those, actually. Those are all noticeably slower than the modern drives. That's why I made that video. The 10 drives on that list are all within 20% of each other, not of all SSDs. So buy from that list and you will be good to go. What about NVMe SSDs? Now, I have not yet, as of the date of filming this, published my which NVMe drive should you buy, or should you buy one at all. It's been filmed, it's uploaded, it's sitting private at YouTube. I want to space that about a week apart, which is why you haven't seen it yet, but it will publish within maybe 4 or 5 days of this video going up on YouTube. Spoiler alert, if you want an NVMe drive, in August of 2017, there are only 2 drives to consider, the 960 Evo and the 960 Pro. Now, I tested 5 different NVMe drives. I hate to say it, but those are the only 2 worth bothering with. They are by far faster than the others that I tested. In some cases, double the performance of the other NVMe drives. Now, I didn't test every single NVMe drive on the market. It's possible there's another one that's good, but I don't have it, so I can't test it. What I can tell you is that 960 Evo and 960 Pro are unbelievably fast in certain situations. For a $1,200 build, skip them. Don't bother, not worth the money. You aren't going to be doing with a $1,200 build what those drives are meant for. And in day-to-day single or maybe even double task application use, you actually won't notice much of a difference between an 850 Evo and a 960 Evo. You really won't. Professional users would, professional content creators, software developers would. There are circumstances where they make sense, and I talk about that at length in that video. Go check it out once it publishes. But for this $1,200 build, skip them. Let me address one question specifically that was asked. Why not buy the 960 Evo? At the 250 gigabyte size, it is only $27 more expensive than the $100 MX300 drive. I'll tell you why. Because for $10 more than that drive, if you want to spend more money, the Mushkin Reactor drive is $137 on Newegg. It's on sale at the moment. That's not going to last, but it's $137. You can usually find one of these drives for the $140 price range. The Ultra 2 was $141 on the day I filmed this video. They change all the time. Check the links down below. Buy the one that makes the most sense to you. Frankly, in my opinion, the cheapest among the 10 that I recommend. But for a little bit more than the cost of the 258 960 Evo, you can have a 480 gigabyte SATA drive. For this level of machine, I would take a 480 SATA SSD 7 days a week and twice on Sunday over the 960 Evo, no matter how fast it really is for this level machine. For my workstation that I'm going to be doing 4K editing and rendering and uploading on, I'm actually going to have 3 NVMe drives in that machine. I actually have a use for them, and I explained that in the video. But that is not a $1,200 machine, and that is not a normal consumer use case. That's not a gamer use case. That's not a casual live streamer use case. That is a very specific application for some rather expensive drives. So if you're building a $1,200 machine, skip those. If you want to spend more on your storage, buy a larger drive. Let me come back to hard drives for a minute. Several people asked in the comments beneath part 1 of this video series, what about the other brands? What about a Western Digital Blue or a Toshiba P300, for example? Those are both 7,200 RPM drives at this size. Those are fine. There's nothing wrong with a Blue. There's nothing wrong with the Toshiba drives. The performance is nearly identical so long as you're buying a 7,200 RPM drive. Let me caution you, Western Digital makes a 5400 version of the Blue. So that can be confusing if you're not careful. You have to look and make sure which one you're buying. Seagate makes a 5400 version of this, but to the best of my knowledge, it's only the 4 terabyte size. The 3, 2, and 1 terabyte versions of the Seagate Barracuda are 7,200 RPM drives, whereas the 4 terabyte version is the 5400 RPM version. Why? I have no idea. They do. This information may not remain true forever. They come out with new models of these all the time. You can find multiple iterations, multiple part numbers of drives from Seagate and Western Digital that say Seagate Barracuda on them and Western Digital Blue, but the part numbers are different. So when you click those links and when you go shop for a hard drive, if you're interested in having a performance drive, you want a 7200 RPM hard drive. Now, if you don't care and you're just storing videos, movies, if you're just backing up to it, the 5400 RPM drives are fine. The data transfer rate is not really much different between a 54 and a 7200 RPM drive, the actual sequential transfer rate. It's the random seek time that makes a difference. The 7200 RPM drives, the random performance is up to 1/3 faster than the 5400 RPM drives, and they need all they can get, as you saw in my SSD video. Another option you have are external hard drives. Now, most of the external drives are actually 5400 RPM drives, but they connect to the USB 3.0 interface, which has a little bit of latency as well, so it's not as big of a deal. If you need external storage, USB 3 drives are a very fine option. A little bit slower, but hey, if you're already on a hard drive, what's the difference? Now, be aware that the larger Seagate drives, both internal and external, are what's called archive or shingled magnetic recording drives. Principally, this is the 8 terabyte and larger size, the ones that are cheap anyway. You can currently buy an 8 terabyte external Seagate hard drive for under $200 right now. I've seen them down in the $170 price range. Those drives are backup drives. They have horrible random write performance. They are not performance drives and they're not meant for running. You can run games on them, but they're not meant for it. They are backup archive drives. The 4 gigabyte external drives from both Western Digital and Seagate, absolutely fine. The 8 terabyte external drives, the MyBooks from Western Digital, are just fine. Those usually are Western Digital greens or Western Digital reds inside those, and they're perfectly fine for running programs from. I've done it, in fact, with my Western Digital MyBook 8 terabyte drive, which I showed on my channel last year. Just be aware when shopping for those as well, they change part numbers without changing brands. The Western Digital MyBook has been through at least 3 different part numbers and in fact 3 different external clamshells in the past 5 years without changing the branding. Western Digital MyBook 8 terabyte or 4 terabyte, the product name stays the same, but the actual drive and the case changes. So be sure to actually look at what you're buying before you actually click that buy button. Finally, last but not least, power supplies. Which power supply should you buy for this computer? This is probably the second most commented item beneath part 1 of this video series in the comment section. Why on earth was there a $120 850 watt power supply in a $1,200 build? I'm glad you asked. First up, I think you should double check to see how much the 550 or 650 watt versions of that power supply cost. On the day I recorded this video, the difference between the 550 and the 850 watt version of this power supply was $5. I kid you not. Fully modular, flat black, 80 plus gold certified, high quality power supplies really never get that cheap. They don't come down much below $100 or so, sometimes $80 when there's mail-in rebates, but you're not going to be getting them for $50. Now let me show you 2 options up here which are $50. The Corsair CX600, actually now replaced with the CX650, and then the EVGA 600 watt 80 plus bronze power supply. These are both $50 and $60. They are black sleeved cables. They are not flat black and they are not black end to end. Both of them actually have ketchup and mustard color underneath the cables, which you can see through the mesh, and the ends aren't capped so you can see the ketchup and mustard color simply. Now, I've reviewed and used these power supplies in the past. They're very good units. I would have no problem normally putting them into a system of about $1,000, maybe $1,200. It's just fine. But we have an RGB system with a tempered glass case that's glass on both sides, front and top. Ketchup and mustard color have no place on our power supply in this type of build. Now take the RGB out, put it into a non-RGB closed case, and these become much more interesting options. I don't have any problem with putting these in there if that's what you're trying to do. But for the RGB, we need something a little bit better that looks better in that case. The other consideration is if you're building a nice $1,200 machine, I do think there are benefits with going with an 80 plus gold rather than 80 plus bronze power supply. Yes, I am fully aware that the GQ and G2 versions of the EVGA Gold Plus power supplies can be had in the $70 to $80 price range. Again, they are sleeved cables, they're not flat back cables. They're not quite as nice as these premium power supplies. This comes back to the whole, how pretty do you want your system build to be? We have to take great care with cable management in our RGB case, so the completely flat black cables in our higher end power supplies make sense. However, if you are skipping the RGB and you still want the 80 plus gold, then yes, the lower end power supplies, for example, from EVGA, their GQ power supply, which I have reviewed and covered in the past, would be perfectly fine options for a system of this level. So with that being said, let me draw your attention to 4 power supply options here, 3 of which I've already published unboxings and reviews of, one of which, the Seasonic, will be coming up soon. The V750 from Cooler Master, completely fully modular, 80 plus gold certified power supply, flat back cables. This can be had in about the $110 price range. It's available in 850, 750, 650 watts, and so on. If you watch my review on it, you'll see it's a very nice, very attractive power supply. Absolutely, it should be on the short list. What about the one in front of me? The Straight Power 10 from Be Quiet. This is an extremely nice quality looking power supply. It's not the cheapest power supply up here, that would be the Seasonic, but if you like the look of it, if you like the industrial strong look of it, the way the logo looks, the way the style and design looks, it's a few dollars more than the others, but not by much. It's within $10, give or take, in most of the power levels. This is an 800 watt unit. I'll talk about the wattages in a minute. This is where it comes down to the appearance as being a preference. If you like the look of the Seasonic versus the Cooler Master, or if you like the Cooler Master versus the Be Quiet, that's just a personal preference. These are all extremely good units that will provide you with many, many years of service. The Corsair, for example, it's a style and personal preference. This is a very nice unit that will last you a long time, tons of connectors, fully modular, flat black cables. It's a great option for this build. Again, RGB tempered glass case. Now, I mentioned that the least expensive option up here at the moment is the Focus Plus from Seasonic. Now, this is a 550 watt version here, but you can get the 750 watt version from them for not much more. It's currently running about $100, about $110 for the 850. The other benefit to the Seasonic, which it shares with the Cooler Master RM series, 10-year parts and labor warranty. The warranty on all the others is a bit shorter. So if you are at all interested or concerned about the length of the warranty, you're looking at 10 years parts and labor on this. All things being equal, flip a coin. It really probably doesn't make a whole lot of difference. It comes down to style, brand preference. We are building with a Corsair case, so we're using a Corsair power supply. But if you do want those black flat cables, you'll find that the $50 and $60 options don't provide that. Now let's talk about something else, wattage. Now when you're at this level of power supply, the price difference between the 550 watt version and the 850 watt version, in this case is $5, here it's $20, there it's $30. It's not huge. The benefit to getting the 850 watt version instead of, say, the 550 watt version, even if it costs you an extra $20 or $30, is future upgradability. Do you want the next generation Zen 2 or Zen 3 chip to be able to install in your motherboard? Do you want to add a second graphics card in the future? Are you interested in RX Vega? Now, RX Vega is supposed to be powerful. It's also supposed to be power hungry. It looks like we're looking at about 300 watts power draw from the Vega 64 air-cooled card and 375 watts power draw, this is what's been reported so far, on the liquid-cooled RX Vega 64. That's a whole lot of power. Now, the GTX 10 cards do pull a little bit less, but it's worth noting that if you had a second one, these are not overkill for that level of computer. I mentioned earlier in this video and in part 1 that one of the things we're trying to build is a system that has longevity behind it, that you can keep for a long time. This case, you can keep for 10 years. These power supplies you can keep for 10 years. The motherboard you can easily keep for 5 years. You may keep even beyond that depending on when or if you choose to upgrade its CPU. You don't know what you're going to need in the future. By spending an extra $20 or $30 now and getting 850 watt power supply instead of something much smaller, You remove any worries or concerns for having to change it in the future. You certainly are not going to be able to spend $20 3 years from now to go from a 550 or 650 watt to an 850 watt power supply. This is where planning for the future and putting money in hard to upgrade items rather than easy to upgrade items, I think makes a lot of sense. There you have it, my deep dive into all of the parts included in this system, why I included them, why I didn't include something else, and alternative choices you can consider. The idea here is to help your thought process, your thinking behind choosing what you want for your own system. As I said at the beginning of this video, custom PC is custom. This is a suggested build guide to get you started and help you figure out what's right for you. Build the computer that you want, that's right for your needs and how you're going to use it. You don't have to build it like me. In fact, I'm going to show you 2 alternatives to this build here in just a second. Don't go anywhere. If you've watched this far, give me another few minutes of your time. I'm going to show you 2 alternatives to this build right over here in a second, and much of it will be linked down in the description below. This is a $1,200 build, but I'm going to show you what it takes to take it down to an $800 build. Still a good computer, but we have to sacrifice some things to get there. So we are subtracting $400 from the price from $1,200 to $800. Then I'm going to show you an alternative build, upgrading it, going from $1,200 to $1,600. So you basically get 3 builds in one, although I'm physically only putting one of them together. Now, the $800 build, which we'll cover first, keeps a lot of the basic items needed for performance, and what it loses are relatively easy to add in the future. RAM, most notably, easy to add. We're still keeping a solid state drive because that is hard to add in the future, moving or cloning Windows, figuring out what to do, so I still left a solid state drive in. The $1,600 machine, well, it pretty much has everything that I discussed earlier. It's the whole enchilada, more performance, more capability, vastly superior gaming performance. If you have the money, honestly, the $1,600 machine is probably the better long-term value. If you take the price of the machine and divide it across the number of years that you can get good quality gaming, multimedia, live streaming performance out of it before it's time to upgrade again, you may find that on a per year basis, the $1,600 machine actually costs less money than the $1,200 machine. Although in fairness, the $800 machine would give it a run for its money, but it will need in-term upgrades in order to reach 3 to 5 years of life. First up, let's take a look at the $800 build. Now we are keeping the Ryzen 5 1600 CPU, and for an $800 machine, that is an awesome CPU. Again, the hard parts to upgrade I want to keep because things like the RAM and whatnot you can add to or certainly change much easier in the future, but you can't just spend another $50 in the future to glue on 2 more cores. If you buy a Ryzen 5 1400, you'll save $50, but you can't just spend that $50 and just add the cores in the future. So I really think the Ryzen 5 1600 for a gaming multimedia live streaming computer is the minimum I would put together today in August of 2017. One big change is the motherboard. We certainly are not going to get a $150 motherboard in an $800 system build. So I've dropped it down to the MSI B350 Gaming Plus. Still a very nice board. Still technically supports Crossfire, although please don't because of the X16/X4 configuration of the 2 slots. It does have 4 memory slots. It is a nice attractive board. It is not, however, going to be the full-on RGB experience. Doesn't matter because we're ditching the case as well. It is overclockable. It will let you overclock your CPU. And for the $89 price point that it's currently at, I think it's a very nice choice. System RAM is one of the big sacrifices here. In fact, not only are we going down to 8 gigs of RAM, but we're going to a single DIMM module. Yes, this will have a small impact on performance since we're operating in single channel mode. 8 gigabytes of DDR4 2666 can currently be had for $65. You can always add a second module in the future, spend the extra $65, drop it in next to it, and you'll be good to go with 16. It is the easiest thing to upgrade, and while I'm not a fan of 8 gigabytes of RAM on a 6-core 12-thread processor, if you are on a very tight budget, it probably is the thing to drop because it's the easiest thing to add in the future. Now for the system case, we certainly are not going to get a tempered glass RGB case at the $800 price point. Fair enough. In this case, I'm going to spec out the Cooler Master Master Box Lite 5. It is $49.99 on Amazon and Newegg right now. I showed you what the previous version was earlier in the video. It is a mid-tower, wider case, lots of room to install expansions in. I have been extremely happy with the Masterbox 5s I've worked with. Cooler Master is, by the way, sending me a sample of the new version, the Masterbox Lite. You'll see it at some point in the future on my channel. Thank you to Cooler Master for that. But at the $50 price point, it's probably the best deal in cases at that level on the market right now. The graphics card, we're keeping the same at the 3GB GTX 1060. For an $800 machine, don't go below that. The 1050 Ti is half the performance of the 1060. It is way down there. Yes, it saves you a little bit of money, but not nearly enough money to justify the hit to performance. So even at $800, we've got to keep that 1060 there in order to be able to play AAA games at 1080p. For storage, we're going to be making two compromises here. First, the solid-state drive. Dropping the crucial MX300 275GB SSD, we're going to drop it down to the Mushkin Reactor 240GB SSD. Now, this is a 2.5-inch drive, but that's fine. We've got base for that in the Cooler Master case. The size is smaller, but so is the price, $79. Now, it is smaller, so if you divide out the price of $100, you're going to actually find that you're actually only saving $8 versus the MX300. Performance is fine. The Mushkin Reactor drive is just as fast as the Crucial MX300. That's not an issue. The real reason we're making the change is to save the $20 and hit the $800 price point. If you want the extra space, it's still worth buying the MX300 because if you divide it out, 275 gigabytes into $100 versus 240 gigabytes into $80 basically, the Crucial MX300, if it were 240 gigs in size, would be $87. So we're talking about a $7 price difference between the two drives. But we're trying to save $20 and hit that $800. So Mushkin Reactor. The other storage change we're making is we're swapping out the 3TB drive for a 1TB drive. You can currently get the 1TB Seagate Barracuda drive for $45 on Amazon. No, that's not going to last you forever, especially with the size of current games, but hey, we're trying to hit that $800 price point. This is a good example of customization. Want 2 terabytes? Spend $20 more. It's about $65 for a 2TB drive, but then we pass the $800 price point. This is the challenge when building these systems. Where do you draw the line? You can $20 and $30 yourself to a whole new price category if you're not careful. This is why at $1,200 I make this choice versus that choice, because as you add up or subtract items, you end up with an $800 or $1,600 machine if you're not careful. But as with the RAM, hard drive space is fairly easy to add, either internally or simply by plugging in an external USB hard drive. You can always add more space in the future, so we're cutting that back to hit our budget. And finally, our power supply. EVGA's 500 watt 80 plus white certified power supply, $40. Now 500 watts is plenty for this system build. For the CPU, for the graphics card, storage, motherboard, everything, absolutely 500 watts is all you need. You could add another hard drive, another SSD, more RAM, you'd still be fine in this build. But you're really not going to have room to add more graphics cards to it, or perhaps future higher end 8 or 10 core or whatever CPUs come out in the future. It is true that a 600 watt power supply is only going to cost you about $25 more. Again, my previous statement, you $20 and $30 yourself to another price category. You want a 500 or 600 watt bronze certified power supply? Another $20 or $25 will get you that. But the 500 watt 80 plus white certified is really all this machine needs, and it's what we need if we want to hit our $800 budget. So what is the net effect of the compromises? If you look at this video and decide to build that $800 machine instead of this $1,200 machine, what are you really effectively giving up? Will your game stop running? Will the computer not work? No, of course not. It'll work just fine. But with 8 gigabytes of system RAM, which is probably the biggest compromise in the whole system from a day-to-day use point of view, you're going to find your ability to multitask, to live stream games, to do content creation to be quite limited. It will do all of that to a point, but you're going to find that you're going to need to add another 8 gigabytes of RAM sometime in the next year or so, or it's just going to become an ever bigger limitation going forward. As far as storage, that's pretty simple. It has a lot less storage than the $1,200 build does. Whether that's a concern to you depends entirely upon your personal use circumstances. Maybe you already have an existing hard drive you can put it in and you don't need to put one in. Fair enough. The power supply, not a limitation today, possibly in the future. Now as for the RGB aspect, That's totally personal taste. The RGB lights and the pretty tempered glass case on the Crystal 570X is entirely aesthetics. It's entirely form, not function. Your computer is not faster because it has RGB lights. I know people joke, hey, it's RGB, it makes it 10% faster. No, it doesn't. So that's entirely personal taste. Those of you who are longtime viewers of my channel may look at this $800 build and go, boy, that's much more of the tech deals we expect. Fair enough. But there are people who view the beauty of the RGB as a deal in and of itself. After all, most people drive their cars around on stock rims. Yes, I'm using a car analogy, but plenty of other people decide to upgrade their wheels and tires and spend thousands of dollars putting something shiny and pretty on their cars, or they redo up their upholstery, or they put stripes on their Mustang or whatever. There's nothing wrong with it. It doesn't make your car faster or better in any way. It simply makes it look nicer. And if you're okay to spend the money, then by all means do so. Please remember, mix and match. Take some of the components from the $1,200 build, take some of them from the $800 build. You can build this any way you want, so add and remove parts as you see fit. This is meant to be a guide to help you build the system that works best for you. Please remember, it doesn't make any difference to me which system you build. I'm here to help you make the decision that you are ultimately happy with. Well, that's all well and good at the $800 price point, but if we double it to $1,600, do we really get that much more for our money? Well, that depends upon your point of view. All the RGB stuff stays of the $1,200 build. We're simply adding to it. The first big change, Ryzen 7 1700. If you are going to go much beyond the $1,200 price point, or even possibly at that price point, get a Ryzen 7 1700. No, for gaming in 2017, you don't need an 8-core chip. The Ryzen 5 will do just fine. No, for casual live streaming, for casual content creation, for just home multitasking use, no, you don't need an 8-core chip today. But you'll grow into it. Over the next 5 years, you will absolutely grow into that Ryzen 7. And while the Ryzen 5 1600 is the best deal today, in my opinion, for CPUs, if you change that into a 5-year time horizon, I would change that recommendation to a Ryzen 7 1700. I very much believe that the Ryzen 7 1700 is today's i7 2600K. If you had 6 years ago, in January of 2011, bought an i7 2600K, overclocked it to 4.5 gigahertz, and we're still using it today, I'd suggest keeping it. It still doesn't need upgrading. It has its limitations, and there are situations where you might want to upgrade. But if you're happy with its performance, you might be pleasantly surprised at how well it still runs today. I know, I have one downstairs. I've done game performance videos on that. I've published those on my channel. I have an i7 2600K overclocked to 4.5 gigahertz. It is only about 20% slower across the board from an i7 7700K at 5 gigahertz. Clock for clock, it is very, very minor difference in performance between a 2600K and a 7700K. I believe, based upon my decades of experience in this business, that the 2017 equivalent to that is Ryzen 7 1700. You may not need all of that today, but you'll grow into it. 8 cores, 16 threads. Buy it today. 5 years from now, you may be looking at the current processors going, what do I need to upgrade for? This does everything. Yeah, I use it a bit more now than I did when I bought it, but it's running all the current games. The extra cores are now being used. I'm running these new programs. The next version of Windows is out, and it's running everything great. I think I'll just keep it. And because of the AM4 platform and AMD's commitment to keep that in place for a minimum of 4 years, if you do decide to upgrade it, well, you can probably still keep your motherboard, but you might find 4 or 5 years from now, there's no reason to upgrade it. The motherboard remains the same. For a $1,600 machine, honestly, I would still stick with the X370 Gaming Pro Carbon from MSI, or one of the other $150 to $160 boards if you prefer something different. The features, the capabilities, the expansion options, the proper SLI and Crossfire multi-GPU support with it'll split those 8x8x running directly to the CPU for both cards. Yes, you can Crossfire put 2 cards into a B350 board, but the support's poor the way it works. You really don't need to spend any more than that $150. I mean, you really have to go to $2,000 or beyond before it's worth spending $200 plus on a motherboard, in my opinion. So we're keeping the same board. Exactly the same thing with the RAM. We're keeping the 16 gigabytes of RGB Corsair DDR4 3000 RAM. I thought about trying to put 32 gigs in here, but that doubles the price of that and it becomes a challenge to fit it within the 16. What else are you going to take out to hit that $1,600 budget? For most consumers in 2017, 16 gigabytes is enough. Now, if you're a professional content creator or software developer, you probably should be on 32 gigs, but games don't need 32 gigs today, and if you need them in the future, it'll be easy enough to buy 2 more sets of memory and install them and upgrade to 32 gigs in the future. Same thing with the case, we're leaving that there. But again, as I said before, mix and match. If you like some of the upgrades to the $1,600 machine, but you don't care about RGB, put the case from the $800 machine into some of the upgrades of the $1,600 machine and kind of create a hybrid that works for you. There are a lot of different ways to do this. That's the whole point of a custom computer. That leads us to the biggest upgrade of all, the graphics card. If you are spending $1,600, you should definitely not be on a 1060. We are putting in a GTX 1080 8GB card. Do you want to play Mass Effect Andromeda, Ghost Recon Wildlands, all the current games, 1440p, high detail, or better in most circumstances, 60 frames per second or better in most games? The GTX 1080 will do that. Now you could of course go with a 1080 Ti, and 1600 is enough to fit it into the budget. For example, take the RGB stuff out, put a 1080 Ti in, and now you've got a 4K gaming machine for $1,600. Or the ultimate high refresh rate, 1440p. Do you have a 100 Hz 1440p panel? A 1080 Ti on a Ryzen 7 1700 will play games at 1440p at 100 frames per second without any problem. Choices, they're a good thing. With storage, we have just one change. We are keeping the 3TB drive, but the solid state drive is changing. For $1,600, we should have a bigger SSD. So we're going to replace the MX300, and instead, for $137, we're going to put the 480GB Mushkin Reactor drive. That's currently on sale at Newegg at the moment. Prices change in the future, but as of the date of this filming, that was $137, and that's a really, really good price for 480 gigabytes of solid-state storage. 3TB drive stays the same. And finally, for the power supply, no changes. The Corsair 850 watt 80 plus gold fully modular power supply stays as is. This puts us right at $1,600. So there you have it, 3 builds. The one I'm building for $1,200, a possible alternative build for $800, and then a wonderfully upgraded build for $1,600. Mix and match as you please. Now, coming up after this video is going to be the build video itself. It may take a couple of days to publish from when this goes live, because I actually need to build the system, and I'm going to actually set everything up and do Windows installation and testing before I publish the build video to make sure everything runs well. After that is going to be Windows performance, and then I'll do some game performance on it as well. And then finally, my goal is to get some beautiful RGB shots, do kind of a final review of the system once it's all put together, and preferably if I can get some beauty shots, maybe get some RGB lighting for it. That's the goal at least. We'll see how well that works. I hope so far this video series has been helpful to you. Be sure to like this video if you like it, share it with your friends if you loved it. Remember to subscribe to my channel with the big huge red button directly below this video. Questions and comments in the comment section, and as always, check out the links in the video description. The first link there will be the full playlist of videos in this series, and then beneath that will be as many of the links to all the products I talked about in this video that I can possibly stuff down there. There is a limit to the length of YouTube video descriptions. If they don't all fit, there will be a link over to my blog spot, which I actually haven't updated in a while, but I may create a blog over there and put the rest of the links to all these products. As always, if you find this video helpful and useful, please use my links when shopping at Amazon and Newegg. It really does make a difference, and I thank you very, very much. At the bottom of the video description will also be my link to Patreon. While I do receive samples from manufacturers, I don't receive any financial support for them, and I still buy a lot of what I review. That MSI motherboard, for example, I bought. So if you can absolutely help me out in any way via Patreon, any contribution is helpful. I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.